It's the first time we're having the government intervene with any frontier model in this way, and that sets a precedent of this form of capability gating, which will lead to a different world.
He says that's a real frontier capability, and that's where the open weights fall off a cliff. It's not even close. These are autonomous, long-running jobs that require the models to have the capability to make thousands of tool calls in a work that takes hours or days, or some people have tried weeks. But even in my experience, for my very simple use case, they failed at chaining 3-4 tool calls back to back, let alone thousands.
But on the offensive, how can we produce more revenue or money? And then if you find a money loop and it's truly producing money, the modern day ATM glitch in the matrix.
Loop engineering for businesses. Money loop. I love it. One concept I'm very excited about is proactive AI. AI that doesn't just respond to things, but instead proactively does things. Paddy, the US government cut access to Anthropic's latest models, Fable and Mythos. What do you say?
It's a little concerning. I think depending on how you look at it, it's not too much of an issue. I think when I initially read it, especially with all the hype around Mythos from Anthropic a month in advance, talking about the cybersecurity risks and general world risks around chemical or biohacking, and then within a few days of it getting launched, the US government shut it down, citing security issues. After reading more into it, it seems like it was more of a personality clash or relationship issue between Anthropic and the government. Funnily, this is happening while the president is throwing a UFC fight on the White House lawn. So I can imagine Anthropic having a difficult time trying to make progress with the government to get this model back online. But I'm less concerned about, or I worry less about this specific release or government stopping Fable 5. I'm sure it'll get resolved in the next few days or weeks. But I do believe what caught my attention is that it's the first time we're having the government intervene with any frontier model in this way, and that sets a precedent of this form of capability gating, which will lead to a different world if all, depending on who you are, or if the government sets this precedent, who gets access to what level of capability. And then I think something that we've talked about a lot is, okay, these frontier models, or even on one of our previous episodes, everyone or serious people who want to spend the money are always going to want access to the frontier model. And at the moment, that's a 2-horse race, and it goes between OpenAI and Anthropic. And I know everyone has their preferences, but open source is only a couple of months behind and is much, much cheaper. And I think if we go into this world, and Dario even advocates for having more government involvement or this form of security checks, citing his concerns, which again, they did a month of testing this release before releasing it and still get shut down. So I don't know where this leads, but if there's a world where the government are getting more and more involved and heavily involved, and we don't get access to the latest models, and that usually how the government works, and when they get more involved in these processes is that they stack on the kind of delays. I think where we get the most enjoyment today out of these new releases is playing with the latest release, but I fear that this is the first step towards losing that gap, losing that access to frontier models as a consumer. This is just starting as well, where we'll start to see other capability gating from just access to compute and energy, which has been my fear for a while as well, where we have these bottlenecks in building out data centers and energy to supply these data centers, that all the compute ends up just going to the biggest enterprises in the world that have the biggest budget. But now the government is also adding this layer of capability gating, is what I'm calling it in my head. But yeah, I'm sure it'll get resolved. There's a big story in the last week. It's crazy how much things happen between every time we sit down to talk. But yeah, I don't like the precedent that it sets. I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned, the gap, several months gap that we're observing between the frontier models and the open source models. And if the government is slowing down the release of frontier models, what happens to that several months gap is something that we had talked about. So as you were actually explaining, I thought about a little bit more. What if Fable is not being released and at the same time open source models are catching up, but they can't catch up because apparently, as far as I have observed, the way the open source models are getting closer to the frontier models are by distilling the frontier models that are already public. It seems that Chinese open source labs have become extremely good at having thousands and thousands of computers making API calls to Anthropic's LLM API and OpenAI's LLM API. pretty much stealing the API's capability, models capabilities, and which is called distilling. And that results in the open source models, which Anthropic and OpenAI have been increasingly getting better at preventing these kind of distilling practices. So if Fable is not out there, there's no distilling that can happen. So the gap cannot close if my theory is correct. So that's one interesting thing. And related, yesterday that I saw a strong open source model was released, GLM 5. And so Simon Willison had a blog post, well-respected engineer. A lot of people respect his opinion. He wrote about that. And also turns out I met this guy. I was looking at why. I just wondered earlier today, like, why do people like this guy so much? I went to his about page and he was the director of engineering at Eventbrite before what he's doing right now. And before that, he sold his company Lanyard to Eventbrite and he's British, and I met him. I used to live in London at the time, and I was head of product for, like, I think I moved to London. I was in Amsterdam then. And I met him, I think, at South by Southwest, because they had Lanyard, which was like a event management software that then they sold to Eventbrite. But now I realize that because I saw him on Lenny's podcast, so I'm like, this guy's familiar. He's so familiar. And then anyway, well-respected guy. He's saying now GLM 5.2 is probably the most powerful text-only open weights LLM. And he's saying in his blog, it's the leading open weights model on the intelligence index. And at 51, it leads Minimax M3, which is 44, Pro, Max, also 44, K2.6, which is 43. So I've actually played with these models. My personal AI agent app that's in the App Store, mio.fyi, mio.fyi, actually uses Kimi K2.6 out of the box because that's kind of like free open source model. And it's okay. It's okay. My test actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your eval, or
I'll tell you what that is. But first, I'll tell you what Simon's test is. He has his own test. I have my own test. He's also saying GLM 5.2 uses more output tokens per task than other leading open weight models. So that's another issue. His test is he's using them to generate some images and animations on, I think one of them is a platypus and the other is like, so he said that it was good in one of them, not so good in the other one. Mine is calorie tracking. So one of my main use cases for personal AI assistant was calorie calculation. So net calories per week. So starting from Monday through Sunday. So I have a goal of having 14,000 net calories in a week. So if I don't surpass 14,000 net calories, I don't gain weight. So then I use my personal to remain below 14,000. But net means the food that I ate minus the exercises. So then I have Claude in the app, and I have Kimi K2.6. And this after evaluating maybe 7 or 8 other open source models, various ones, including GLM 5.1, I believe, the one previous to the one that just came out. One of the Q1 ones, I tried Minimax, I tried DeepSeek, even Nemotron from NVIDIA, a couple others. Most of them are failing at tool calls. So MCP tool calls is my main high-level evaluation. Not just you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. No, chained multiple tool calls in a row without failing, right? So in this case, my test is simple. Are you able to calculate net calories through multiple days? So it needs to first make a tool call to get the food that I ate. Let's say it's Thursday. So starting on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sum them up. And then go again, Monday through Thursday, get my exercises, surf session, walk, tennis, add them up. And then deduct the exercises from the meals and then give me the net. Would you believe it? Most of these open source models are failing at giving you the correct number. They just either fail at making multiple tool calls or just stop. And it's not very hard, this test. Claude works every single time correctly. So that was my test. Have you ever played with any of these open source models yet?
No. Yeah, I lean on you to be the technical tester of these open source models. I think back to the point of when I'm not at enough scale of token use to want to be finding the efficiency in these open source models. But I think when the capabilities catch up and we have more agents built across either current company or future companies, then it becomes, which gets talked about a lot in the last kind of year or even in the last few months between these larger corporations that went from token maxing to trying to be as efficient as they can with their token use. The main part of that is identifying which models are the most efficient model to get the correct output, or how would you define it? The best quality output, the most acceptable output for the most efficient token use. where I'm just not there yet for needing to optimize. But I love when you give me the feedback on how the different open source models are evolving to keep a track of. At what point when your eval evolve into which model can get you the best fitness results? And it becomes your coach of, oh, which coach has actually led me to my target weight?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you being a first mover in that, at what point does that become the norm for society?
Yeah, for me, my main concern was that the only reason I looked into this is I'm going to push this app to the App Store. A bunch of people are going to download it, and my Claude, like they may or may not pay because I wanted it to be free in the beginning, right? And then Claude is expensive. Each calculation doing something like this is not in the cents, but it's tens of cents because of the token use, and it just adds up really quickly. And I didn't want to bankrupt myself personally, so I said I need to learn about these open source models. And that's, I think, how other companies, Paddy, are also seeing why they need to evaluate open source models is the bill, the invoice that you get. So they kind of get scared where that's going to go, and they need to evaluate open source models to reduce their token costs. CFOs are kind of driving this. We've heard the stories about Uber spending a lot of tokens, and they already spent all of their token budget, and their CFO is trying to put the kibosh on that right now. But in the end, I don't think that's a great idea to do that, to play defense and try to cut costs and just making the assumption or maybe high level observation that the open source models are good enough. I don't think they're good enough for the kind of work that we're trying to do. So that kind of brings me to the next topic, which I want to discuss with Anthropic. CEO Dario Amodei had an interview with, I believe, Emily Chang from Bloomberg. But you want to say something?
A few points. Some of the topics will come back to just, I think, recommendation around, are the open source models good enough? Or like, it depends on the use, of course. And that's where like setting the right objective functions and setting the right loops, which we'll come back to later. We'll jump in here. Side note as well, interesting that I feel like we talk much more about Dario than Sam in the recent few weeks.
Sam hasn't said anything interesting lately. I don't know. Has he? I haven't seen it.
No. One note I saw, which I found interesting, didn't see anything about it other than he was with President Trump. He's with the president at lunch like yesterday or something.
Yeah.
Again, interesting that he's sitting beside the president, not really very vocal, and at the same time his competitor is getting their latest model shut down.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That I read Sam's bio. I read Dario's bio. I read Demis Hassabis's bio. I'm very interested in all of these people. I resonate with Dario a little bit more, I think. Also Demis, because they're scientists. And so in terms of token spend, he was asked the question about the open source models catching up. And he basically says that they're not catching up. He says open models can analyze a vulnerability. I guess the original question was about Mythos. Can they also do something like Mythos? And then he says that they can analyze a vulnerability only when it's handed to them, like the needle. He said he makes the haystack and the needle comparison. But they cannot autonomously scan a giant code base, which is the haystack, to find and exploit it. So he's basically saying open source, open weight models, open source models, they cannot do end-to-end autonomous work. He says that's a real frontier capability, and that's where the open weights fall off a cliff. It's not even close. So that's what he's saying. He says people don't understand this. People really, truly don't understand the capability gap here. And he's also saying, Paddy, the gap is not the cleverness, but it's the compute. So he says the frontier baseline compute is growing. So 10x a year. So Anthropic, OpenAI, they hit an 80x annualized pace in Q1 of 2026. And open source communities they don't have this money, Paddy. They don't have the hundreds of billions of hardware. So that's why they're resorting to trickery like, distilling Anthropic's models. And by the time they replicate a capability, the frontier has moved orders of magnitude ahead already. So that was his explanation, and that actually resonated with me. I understood that.
Yeah, no. When I saw that Bloomberg interview come out, I was like, oh, amazing. Well, I got Dario's point of view on the government shutting it down, but obviously it took them maybe a week or so to produce the video because it was clearly recorded before Fable was released. But yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's a good point. With the Fable release, for my own use and seeing people's commentary online, the biggest unlock was how long it would run for on a set task. It could run for, you can have other models run for hours, but it seemed like this, and that's how I guess Mythos was finding these huge vulnerabilities. CEO Palo Alto Network was talking about this as well on a recent podcast when they received Mythos and run that against all the different code bases that are on these large enterprise customers of theirs that are their cybersecurity customers, it was finding thousands of vulnerabilities just by letting it go at that full code base and run for hours. And they spent millions on tokens to find those vulnerabilities. But yeah, to your point, I don't believe any open source model has the capability to run for days to find these, or to go through these huge code bases.
Yeah. Aside from the vulnerabilities, really, let's think about the work that we're trying to do, the concepts that we're talking about. We talked about loop engineering last week. We're going to talk about software factory today. But these are autonomous, long-running jobs that require the models to have the capability to make thousands of tool calls in a work that takes hours or days, or some people have tried weeks. I already told you like how my eval is just like caveman eval, right? It's nothing scientific. But even in my experience, for my very simple use case, they failed at chaining 3-4 tool calls back to back, let alone thousands. And these are supposed to be the best open source models available on Olama. So when it comes to autonomous work, and which to me is the most important part of what agents are able to do, if we're not trying to automate end-to-end work, then it's just AI assistant.
Yeah. If you think about what typical work looks like on a laptop, or white collar work looks, the amount of context switching that happens, or tool calling. And for humans doing the work, you call it context switching. They're logging into different tools, they're going onto different tabs, they're going between an Excel sheet to a Word doc to Slack to their Gmail to Notion, whatever it is. They're all different tools that a model would have to connect into to replicate that task, right? So yeah, I think it is a necessary unlock if we're talking about these long run loops, which we'll get into in a later section. But if we're getting into those long running loops, there's going to be those are tool calls are going to stack up. And if you really want to have a company, if you want to have a company running on these different agents that are replicating what today is human workloads, the more tool calls, the longer running capabilities, the wider the breadth of tasks you can set these models up to do, or just increase capability, which you can't get with other models at the moment.
Yeah, just so many unknowns. On the same topic, just a few days ago, I followed Magenta founder on LinkedIn, and he posted on this subject. Basically, he's pro open source because he was talking about how Magenta was open source and then grew the community and how that's a great business model. And that's why open source models are going to win. And he was quoting Brian Armstrong, who's the Coinbase founder CEO, who also believes this to be true. He's basically saying things like 80% of the work now we're able to offload to the open source models and get it done more cheaply. So I read this. So I think I also encourage our viewers to think for themselves, right? So thinking for ourselves is not very easy. And I learned this skill about 2 decades ago when I had a roommate who used to work for Morgan Stanley. And then when Twitter was popular, so we were 2009 or something like that. So I used to read Twitter and look, this person said that, kind of. It helps. It basically, your opinion becomes other people's opinion when you read about these kinds of things. And then he was kind of, and probably the first and most recognizable in my life, the original thinker that I've known. And for his job, he would just go down to the gym and read prospectus from the companies for 3 hours and form his own opinion based on facts. And he wouldn't give any value to what anybody else said. So this discipline, I think, is important, like right now, kind of doing our work, having our own opinions instead of somebody else said this, I haven't done the work myself. As a result, my opinion is also the same as the other person's opinion. So this is one of those areas, I think. So I disagreed with both, right? The Magento founder and also Brian Armstrong. And my angle was different. So my framing is that, okay, I buy the fact that 80% of the tasks we can offload to open source models because they're simple, right? But that's not where the value is. I'll give you like one task that I offload to a cheap, not an open source model, but one of the OpenAI's nano models is as a part of our influencer agents. One of them is we constantly get new influencer data, but we don't know where they are. It's location data is not easily available. And then you have to look at their captions and bio to see if there's a flag of a country or a language, or what language people are commenting on, or a location, something like that. There's some indicators there, but something has to look at it. But this happens at such a high volume, like hundreds of thousands of influencer rows. You can't use a frontier model for this one. It becomes very expensive. So this task is a low value task. an OpenAI Nano model or Gemini is one of the cheaper flashlights or something like that, that's fine. So I can see 80% of the tasks going to open source models, but this is not where the value is. So we talked about last week also, Paddy, SaaS pricing, agent pricing, SaaS apocalypse. One of the reasons is that if people are able to build their own stuff, what can companies charge for? If you're saying that, look, I'm going to build my software using free open source models that anybody can get for free, then what value is there, right? So what I was saying is that maybe 80% can be done by open source models, but the real value lies in the difficult stuff. Real value meaning the things you can charge money for lies in the 20%. So unless your application or software or product is doing difficult things using expensive open source models, it's not worth anything because anybody can use open source models and just do it themselves. So that was my kind of like different framing on that one.
But this also ties into identifying the outcome and outcome maxing. To your point, if we stay on that example of an influencer agent, that loop of starting from discovery, understanding where an influencer is, understanding an influencer that is a match for the campaign, for that brand or advertiser, there's all these different tasks along that loop. And to your point, different parts of or different tasks along that loop will have different levels of difficulty, and different models will be capable of receiving the sufficient outcome to get to the end objective of launching with that influencer or getting them to post or driving revenue or whatever the outcome is set for that campaign. So I think the value actually comes to the most efficient way to achieve that outcome. So if you can create the loop that can get the outcome for the least amount of token use, I think that's who ends up winning. But also you need to be able to effectively communicate that and show that value to the end customer, the advertiser in that example. And I think to your point, there's probably multiple tasks in that loop that require a frontier model for a better outcome, whether that's the more qualitative aspect of coaching the insert into the exact type of campaign that you want them to produce, if that's UGC or some kind of video that you want to be very specific to an upcoming campaign, and maybe you're doing that across hundreds or thousands of influencers. Again, if we draw the analogy to what humans are doing today, like that's a more like you want to have a very competent human coaching this large group of influencers to get really high quality groups of influencers producing high quality content or results or driving more conversions. But also there's junior people on a team that, just identify influencers that might be a match. Anyone can pull that. So Gemini Flash to get that initial pull. But then as the kind of loop continues on, and again, maybe it's a more long-running task, you need 50,000 influencers for a huge launch that you have coming up. So I think where value starts, if everyone can make these agents, I think to your argument that how do you differentiate, the differentiation comes between how efficient you can get that same outcome. If everyone is trying to launch an influencer agent, and I've seen a bunch of people launching them recently, which is funny to see these posts getting
somebody
2 million.
Just shared world's first. I was like, you're launching an influencer agent in June of 26. That's more like world's last. Ours wasn't. And I'm like, we've moved on 10 times from that already.
That honestly frustrates me a little bit when I see these, I can't remember the name, Orca or something. And this video on X gets 2 million views. And someone actually, this other person, another friend of mine, texted to me, and I was like, that like, it looks pretty basic. But they made a good video about it, and it got the right impressions on and got into the algorithm.
For 2 minutes.
X.
There's this other one that, like we have the world's best influencer agent, and then founder left 2 months later and he's working somewhere else now. It's just like, these are all kind of...
But why it frustrates me is that because I've seen the capability of the influencer agent being just one example of the Gentic agents, I think the agents that you've built deserve more attention. And that's something we can
tell
in
us.
The weeks to come.
A good product doesn't sell itself. Distribution is everything.
Distribution, marketing, awareness. We need to figure out a better marketing strategy for Gentic.
So last week, we talked about loop engineering. I had an explanation of loop engineering that we also posted on TikTok, which kind of went viral and has close to 100,000 views now. Turns out it's interesting. You can start a TikTok account with 0 followers and still have massive distribution. So now I understand. I never used TikTok before. Now I understand why this platform is winning, because it gives people opportunity to be seen, even if they didn't have a massive following. or anything. If you actually go do a search on loop engineering, our video is at the top right now.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But then I realized my description of loop engineering, my personal recipe of how I do loop engineering is actually a lot more complex than what basic description of loop engineering is. So basic description of loop engineering is just you have a cron job that wakes up the agent. So the agent keeps doing the work. So that's loop engineering. My description, a part of it, which is basically the agents that work together to complete a series of tasks, they check their email every 5 minutes. So that's the loop in my whole process. But they do a whole bunch of other things. And I was like, I explained a lot. So this is like loop engineering plus. But turns out it has another name, which I didn't know that was pretty much the same thing. So this new concept is our next topic, Paddy. It's the concept of a software factory. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, it gets a lot of attention these days on Twitter about these software factories, or in other words, multi-agent loops that are factories of agents, I guess is where the name comes from, that are producing software, producing these end results, which, yeah, I would love to hear you go into more detail around what it looks like on the inside of one of these software factories, which I think, yeah, to your point, that's where you describing loop engineering last week was more this software factory with all these kind of multiple agents checking their work and improving the output of this factory.
Yeah, so like loop engineering is like the core of building a software factory. And how I'm doing my work right now is somewhere in the middle. So I haven't fully achieved the software factory status right now. Actually, there's a company called Factory.ai, and they productize this, even a software factory product you can download. They announced it a couple of days ago, I think. And they have customers like NVIDIA and all the top guys. And they're even saying nobody is doing proper way to do software factory. It's such a new concept. There's nobody that we know of who does this properly. So basically their description is that a software factory is the system that manages the whole software development loop, not just writing the code. So it starts from the top. It takes in the signals like bug reports, customer feedback, internal conversations, business requirements, and then helps them turn into planned changes that get built, tested, reviewed, shipped, and monitored. So I haven't just automated yet the parts that kind of turn into ingestion into the software building part of it. And also the idea here is that it should self-improve over time, code reviews, security issues, deployments, incidents. So I described, again, I have components of it. Remember, I have this one agent that checks every 5 minutes if this server is healthy or not. If not, it just fixes it and deploys it, sends a CTO, the pull request review. So that's another component. That's like the self-healing. We discussed that a little bit. So then the idea is that engineers are not building the software anymore. They're building and governing the factories that build the software. And there's just a lot of interesting components here before the code is written and after. I think this is kind of like the way to build an autonomous organization, but it doesn't actually have to be just software building. It can be like a company factory. Just think about a company like Paul Street. Can you envision how a factory setup can work in a company like Paul Street?
Yeah, I think this is, we touched on it last week, and this is what I want to talk about more in this loop engineering, or what is a loop? If you think about a loop, or how I think about a loop, is it's just a feedback loop of any process or any workflow, which every company, or you could argue that any company is just one large loop of how to make money. Or you could think about any company that's trying to make profit as a money loop. And everything that the company does is something in that loop. But you can get more and more and dig into every different team or department or workflow or task as a feedback loop of something that drives that end result. And I think if you look at Paul Street, we have 5 or 6 different departments or teams. And then within those teams, each kind of role and individual has their own tasks, a set of tasks or workflows that we have defined metrics around. We work on the EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. So that's our feedback loop of if that team or individual is doing a good job, or if they're getting the outcome that we're hoping to get, whether that's driving inclusions for our clients, or again, driving revenue for clients that drives revenue back to us or drives value to our clients. That's a feedback loop. Every business has their own forms of these loops all across the organization. And you can have as high at the highest of levels of what's driving the business forward, down to as granular as how's an individual organizing their tasks or achieving the metrics that were set to them, whether that's OKRs or EOS or whatever traditional business operating system that a company works within. So yeah, then you have Peter Steinberg talking about you shouldn't be prompting coding agents, you should be designing loops, and this thesis of loop engineering, which I think, or this idea of loop engineering, which sparked a lot of people in the comments on TikTok saying, oh, that's just token maxing, and these guys are just have endless credit cards that are being funded by Anthropic to drive more token use. So no, I think the idea and concept around a loop is as old as any business process, but it's becoming more relevant to talk about this loop in this world of AI as we build these agents, because as we've talked about before, as we all know, what's really important in building an efficient or useful agent is having these really clearly defined objective functions so that the agent can be measured, or you can have an eval on whether that agent is achieving the objective function or not. So after last week's episode and thinking more about this idea of loop engineering, I was trying to think, okay, to your point, yeah, that's the very technical version of building a code base or having a software company and having this team of, or having multiple agents producing these loops. But again, at a service business, a company of humans working in these loops, my job today is trying to find the loops that are driving the most revenue, or find these money loops. So last night I was thinking about this and I was like, oh, really my job should be just focused on hunting for money loops. Hunt for these loops. And this can apply to any person that's running a company, or can apply to any person who's trying to start a company, anyone who doesn't have a job right now. What are the money loops in the world today that you can identify and build an agent around, or software factory around, or team of agents that will complete these money loops?
Did you just coin money loops yourself, or have you seen it somewhere else?
I think I coined it myself.
I think you coined it. I haven't seen it anywhere. It's very cool. Money loops.
Sorry, yeah, I haven't seen it anywhere. But yeah, go hunt for money loops. But if you can find these money loops, and again, if you take it back to the example of Paul Street or what we do, the easy example would be, okay, our sales process or something. So that clearly drives revenue. So that's a money loop. So if we can have, which we don't, we're constantly working on this, but we never really had an outbound system. All of our clients typically come to us through either our own network or referrals. So this is something on the top of my mind now is, okay, we probably need to build that sales engine just so we can insert agents into it. That's a money loop that is there. I know the money loop exists, but I never had a human in doing that feedback loop. It's hard to just build an agent around it. But I'm sure there's countless examples of money loops in the world today. I think for this podcast, we have, or you've built these agents that kind of do a lot of the podcast editing, the videos. A world I'm not too as familiar with, but I know it gets talked about a lot. There's clipping. And so you have these kids leaving college and they just have as a side job of just clipping videos. Or in other words, if you clip a video and it can get more views, that you can generate money on, I guess, YouTube or these different monetization channels. Or if you build an agent to do that, would be a money loop. So you have kids out there that want to find these money loops. There's one. This is only last night I was thinking about this, but maybe that's something we come back to every now and then as we identify different money loops. But yeah, every company is full of these feedback loops or workflows. And I think as any organization moves to becoming more agent native or AI native to become more efficient, yeah, there's going to be the efficiency loops. There's the other one, okay, we can save time, which is where most of our progress has come internally so far. Is okay, we have a bunch of different systems that save our company time, but on that's more defensive, I think of. Okay, that's giving back our humans time. But on the offensive, how can we produce more revenue or money? And then if you find a money loop and it's truly producing money, that's the modern day ATM glitch in the matrix.
Loop engineering for businesses. Money loop. I love it. So Paddy, one concept I'm very excited about is proactive AI. So AI that doesn't just respond to things, but instead proactively does things, which I believe is a part of the capability overhang that we have right now, that many people aren't doing this. I'm not even doing it enough. I think we just need to keep driving there as much as we can. And the idea of a software factory relies on proactive AI as well. So just when you're reading the description of what's required in a software factory, it starts with signals like bug reports, customer feedback, internal conversations, things like that, reviews, any kind of social media activity out there that happens, new posts, new videos, new comments. It just needs to feed in. So we talked about the company brain, and all these data needs to feed in, and proactive AI then looks at it and does things. Again, everything old is becoming new. We talked about Markdown being a very popular file format now that agents like, and cron jobs as old as the wheel in the world of software development. Just you set up a cron job and then it just does things on a schedule. And now cron jobs are waking up agents, agents keep doing things. So I haven't shown you, but in our Slack channel, we can actually set up an agent on a cron. Like you can say that, hey, let's create an agent. Like Mother will create an agent for you that does things, call these MCP tools, and do it every day at the top of the hour, like at 15 minutes later, like 2:15, 3:15, whatever, and it'll do it. So to do things proactively, like I have set up something that checks my websites. I have an ingest script that's embedded in all of the websites that I have. And then I have it check the ingest MCP server to see how the site has done in the past 24 hours and just let me know what's going good and what's not going good. I don't have to, normally you have to log into analytics software to do that kind of stuff, right? So I'm like, agent is checking daily and letting me know how it's going, if room for opportunity. So now you wanted to do things too, not just check data and let you know what it is. You wanted to do things. So for example, if it found a bug, it could file a bug report in your bug system and just notify engineers or other people, or just even better, just fix the bug, deploy it. I don't even have to know. So that's proactive AI. And we do this now with several of our customers who are interested in doing things like this. But the first thing, we talked about the brain. The data needs to be there. Data needs to be ingested. In this case, customer support tickets. People use things like Gorgias, and tens of thousands of support tickets are in there. That needs to keep coming in, and that needs to be ingested in a central place where agents can use, or reviews, right? People have their own reviews on their own website, or Amazon reviews, or in third party, or on Reddit and places like that. So it needs to listen. You have to have these like listeners out there, and then kind of constantly ingest them into the company brain. So Paddy, this results in a lot of data, which is normally the kind of data that lives in various software platforms these companies use. And all this data is kind of locked in the databases of these SaaS platforms. So when the companies want to have agents have access to these data sources, they can't. Agent doesn't have access to those data sources. Those data sources are locked in some software companies' database. And now they're increasingly adding MCP servers. Hallelujah. June of 2026. Oh, we're announcing our MCP server. Welcome to the modern world. Like, you should have done this 2 years ago, but better late than never. They're doing it, but a lot of the time it doesn't even produce interesting data. Klaviyo has an MCP server. It doesn't do anything interesting other than give you the data that they already show in their dashboard. So just because they have it, it doesn't mean the data is meaningful for agents to take action on either.
Yeah, I think that's how we first built a friendship, almost, was discussing this need for data architecture and infrastructure to enable this world of agents. Maybe to give anyone listening more context, okay, use the example of Klaviyo, as you brought it up. What is the unlock of building out that different architecture, like internally at a brand, or building your own database that's more valuable than just connecting to the MCP server of Klaviyo, and how does that structure lead to the better results of using an agent?
Yeah, so my belief is that there needs to be a central agent-friendly data store, and this needs to be architected correctly and basically finds data from all of the various sources that the company is using and puts it in that one place. That's served through a layer of MCP server, and then the proactive agents and the software factories have access to this. That, to me, is very important. And this data can be any kind of data, right? It can be just regular relational database with SQL queries. A bunch of them are actually, a lot of them, like media files. A lot of companies use these DAMs, like digital asset management type of companies, to store videos or images, their creative departments. And agents need to work with these media files. And then I'll give you an example. Company like Air, right? Everybody uses it. You can't even download a freaking video file from Air. There's no download button. And then people are messaging me, asking me questions like, they need a URL. They need a web URL of a video file or an image file in order for the agent to work with it. They're trying to edit the video. They're trying to make changes on the image or something like that. They don't have it. They're pasting an Air link and giving that to the agent. But the Air link is a web URL, and it's not a URL of the media file. So this media file is hidden, locked in Air's platform that agents can't read. So this is also, I think, the danger of a lot of these SaaS platforms locking down customers' data to build moat for themselves. This is the worst way to build a moat, because the customer is going to go somewhere else. There's going to be guys like me. It's going to be like, look, we're trying to build agents for you. And because you use this software, we cannot build the agent. So you shouldn't use that software. This is what the conversation is like. Instead, it's just stop using it. We'll just store it somewhere else, like Amazon S3 or Cloudflare or someplace like that. So this is very interesting. And then there's vector data. Want to say something?
No, I was going to say, I think where this relates back to an earlier point of needing the models to be more capable for the amount of tool calls they have to use. If your agent is connecting into 5 or 6 or however many SaaS tools to do a tool call every time it needs one piece of information versus having your own well-structured data architecture that can get more of that context or relevant file or whatever it is from your own data architecture, that massively reduces the tool calling.
Yeah, there's that. And then just agents are hungry for data. If agents don't have access to data, that's when hallucinations happen and they become extremely useless. It's just they have access to the world's knowledge through the LLM's training knowledge, and it just doesn't have access to any of the data that the company has, the internal data. And it feels easy to the people that I work with. Hey, let me just upload this to the... I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. You can't just upload the data into ChatGPT and then hope that it works in ChatGPT sandbox with JavaScript, looks at a portion of the file. And if the files are big, it just doesn't work. And then there's the vector portion of it. When you want to do semantic searches, agent search, Paddy, to me is the next frontier, or like the ultimate unlock. Agents being able to do really good search in various types of different data formats, and then do the things that they want to do as part of a software factory, as part of proactive AI, agent search.
So tell me, what is your ideal, or if you're a brand or company setting up the data architecture, what's your ideal stack?
So the
Give an
data
example of what
architectures
you want the agents to be do or what the company is.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's been a learning opportunity for me as well. So data warehouses were kind of like a known place for big data to live in. Anytime there's big data, you used to go into data warehouses like Google's BigQuery or Snowflake. So, but data warehouses are for structured data. You just data tables, you run SQL queries against it. With the AI models and the training, the new concept, data, not new anymore, but the concept of a data lake came to the scene. So the data lake is unstructured raw data, just files in a storage, and the AI would just use those files, but they were not structured. So then you don't get the benefit of having these querying that comes with data warehouse. So the more modern AI agent-friendly concept is called data lakehouse. So this was popularized, I believe, by which is now their core set of products, where data lakehouse is a combination of a data lake and a data warehouse, where you still have files, but they're queryable. So just in my endless quest to find the ultimate data store that's agent-friendly, that people can build brains on, company brains, and everything can go in there, and then just open it up to agents through MCP servers, I have become familiar with data lakehouses in the recent months. So that's one thing that actually we built for Gentic, which is now GenticDB. That's a data lakehouse that's built on Duck technology. So DuckDB is great, super, super fast for querying massive data sets. And data lakehouse version of this is DuckLake. So it allows you to save files on places like Amazon S3 or Cloudflare, which is another storage, but it's cheaper than Amazon S3 to do the data transfer is cheaper. These files called Parquet files. So Parquet files are just files, but you can query them. And then in there, we're now putting other kinds of files as well, like video files or image files or other kinds of media files. So any kind of data goes into a data, and then the agents now have access to that data lakehouse through MCP servers. Just give you an example, like the reviews, customer support tickets, exports from Amazon, exports from other places like Meta Insights, Google Ads Insights, emails, Slack threads, Google Drive documents, Google Sheets, Google Docs, anything that you can imagine. Some of them are structured tabular. Some of them are vector. You can add vector embeddings in these Parquet files and do vector search. And some of them are just like straight up files. So this data lakehouse concept to me is very exciting for giving agents access to do search. Actually, funny thing is Databricks is having a conference, I think, as we speak right now, where I see some people in the data community going there. They're announcing their next generation of data products.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is the foundation that you need, or any company needs, to build anything else that we're talking about in terms of money loops, software factories, an agent that is specifically trying to get these outcomes. You're not going to be able to achieve these outcomes unless you have a well-structured data lakehouse. So yeah, super fascinating. Also something that constantly trying to iterate on and improve myself. And I think that when all these or like any person or company today has access to the same model until the government starts gating it, like we talked about. But we currently all have access to the same level of intelligence. So the real moat is how you apply that to your own data or your own IP, and what you can then produce or sell on to your customers, or improve your service, or improve your output, or improve your efficiency as a company. How do you apply the latest frontier intelligence to your own data? That's, I think, the video game of life that we live in at the moment.
And with that, let's conclude our show. Nice chatting with you, Paddy. Talk to you next week.
Yeah. Talk to you then. Cheers.